I'm a California girl, so I get that California accent thing myself quite a few times. So I know you're coming from that part at least. All right. We doing okay today? Yeah. All right. Okay. Hey, that's cool over here. Cool. All right. Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, and those who choose to identify outside those binary honorifics. Thank you all for attending this event and showing your respect for the diversity being recognized today. So let me introduce myself again. My name is Sage Fox. Like many of you, I had the privilege of serving in uniform. I enlisted in infantry in 1993 and spent time in special operations before working in the Pentagon for the Army Chief of Staff. After active duty, I stepped away from the military to focus on my family and civilian career before returning to service with the Army Reserves in 2008. In 2009, I received a direct commission as a signal officer, and in 2012, my unit deployed to the Middle East. It was there, in Kuwait, that my life started to become really interesting. You see, it wasn't until I had nothing but time on my hands and an inability to escape that I was forced to face myself and the illusions of my life. It took me 39 years, 2 deployments, 2 marriages, and 4 children to realize I was actually female. It was the most wonderfully disastrous discovery of my life. After a career spanning more than 2 decades, I've now worn the uniform of both genders, been both a non-commissioned and a commissioned officer, and my career has taken me from the halls of the Pentagon to the beaches of Haiti to the dry and blistering heat of Kuwait. Today, I stand before you, a transsexual, pansexual, polyamorous woman. A woman living authentically and loving every second of her life. Okay, so that's who I am in a very small nutshell. Having devoted a great deal of my life to serving in uniform, I must admit that it's a strangely wonderful feeling to be here not as a military representative, but on behalf of the LGBT community and as an activist striving for full equality within the military and within our country. While I've got you as a captive audience, I'll do my best to keep you entertained, engaged, and hopefully shine some light on ideas and concepts you may not have had cause to consider before today. So let's move on to the reason I'm here, which surprisingly is not to talk about how wonderful I am. Because I can go on all day, trust me, I can talk a lot. All right. Instead, I want to talk about 3 things: the power of authenticity, the value of diversity, and the history and future of our military culture. Authenticity. Webster's defines authenticity as being true to one's own personality, spirit, or character. True to one's own personality, spirit, character. You may be wondering why this is important, or thinking that being who you are should be a fairly simple matter. But what complicates the act of being is that we are guilty of creating illusions of personality, a false image of who we truly are. This construct of ego is designed to protect us from being hurt, and it surrounds us with a bubble of fear. Fear of the pain of rejection, judgment, derision, condemnation. Destroying that bubble and casting aside those illusions forces you to explore and become who you really are. And that is the greatest gift that you can ever give yourself. It is that act of exploration, that process of becoming, that allows one to truly embrace authenticity. And once you are authentic, with no more pretense, no more masks, looking in the mirror and seeing who you truly are, that's when the rest of your life starts falling into place. You don't waste time on people or activities that don't enrich your being. You don't need to look for peace in a bottle or in a pill. You are at peace, and you are focusing your energies and your time on things that make both you and the world around you better. And it is that pursuit for authenticity that makes the LGBT community truly unique. Because the LGBT umbrella, while comprised of many letters, comes down to three simple but deeply defining things: who we love, how we love, and who we are. Each of us that rejects the heteronormative ideal and instead sets a course into the unknown in search of ourselves must find the answers to these questions. And sometimes we find those answers to be fluid. What is true today may not be true tomorrow. Because of this fluidity of character and heart, the search for truth is never truly complete. I want to briefly touch on each of these ideas with the hope that you'll see why they are important, not just for those of us that are searching for our own answers, but for those of you that may never have stopped to think that these questions were worth asking. Let's start with who we are. Well, this question can be looked at in a million different ways. In this context, we're talking about gender identity and gender expression. Gender identity is how and where you see yourself falling on the spectrum of gender, regardless of your birth sex or perceived biology. This is a much more complicated topic than most people realize. But the essential facts are these. The gender we perceive ourselves as falls within a spectrum and is not simply a choice between male or female. There is no test one can take to determine one's gender, as this is much more a question of who you are than what you are. The letter on one's birth certificate that we assume defines our gender is in fact only an observational indication of sex and not empirical evidence of true gender. If you were born female and you identify as female, then you are a cis woman. If you were born male but identify as female, you are a trans woman. Both are gendered female and both are equally women and deserving of the same rights, respect, and treatment. While gender identity is how we perceive and define our gender, how we act, dress, speak, or communicate is how we express our gender to the outside world. And this expression exists on a separate spectrum from our identity and may be complementary or contrary to that identity. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Who do we love? Most people think the options are pretty simple. If you're straight, you love the opposite sex. If you're gay, you love the same sex. If you're bisexual, you love both men and women. But as you just learned, not everyone falls within those binary ideas of male and female. Those non-binary gender rebels need and deserve love as much as any other. Being open to the idea of love across the spectrum of gender, inclusive of all genders and expressions, is called pansexual. Further, definitions of sexual orientation or the choice of relationship labels should be based on gender identities and not on the birth sex of either partner. A cis or trans man loving a cis or trans woman is in a straight relationship. Have I lost you guys yet? Something okay? All right. It's taking me a while to figure some of this stuff out, so don't feel too bad if you're lost a little bit. All right. Lastly is the question of how one loves. While this isn't generally talked about over much, even within the LGBT community, I do believe it should be mentioned. We generally think that monogamous one-on-one relationships are the ideal and the most natural. They are certainly the most common. But life and love doesn't always fall into clean and simple ideas of right and wrong. While I've always believed in and practiced fidelity in my romantic relationships, I've lately learned to stretch that definition a bit. We don't have a limited capacity for love when it comes to our children, parents, friends, or family. And that same limitless love can be applied to our romantic relationships. Loving more than one person honestly and faithfully isn't inherently good or bad. It's our application of that love and the agreements we make, keep, or break that define the quality of those relationships and those partners, whether they be one or many. Stepping away from the comfortable assumptions that a monogamous relationship allows us, and venturing into the risk of greater heartbreak in polyamorous relationships requires that every partner be willing and able to communicate their thoughts, express their fears, and give and accept love freely. Loving in this way, when done properly, can enrich everyone involved. The most valuable lesson I've learned from exploring the ideals of polyamory is learning to accept each person in our lives, whether friend, family, business acquaintance, or romantic interest, for who they are, and understand that these relationships can evolve or diminish based on the time, energy, and care we give to each person. This habit instills within us a responsibility to nurture and honor the relationships we've created with others. The diversity of love, self, gender, and expression is what gives our community strength, and the open acceptance, without reservation, of each of these spectrums of being can unite society, our country, and especially our military. In 1948, President Truman put an end to racial segregation in the military, a decision opposed by many, and dire predictions were made of an exodus of service members, loss of combat readiness, and destruction of unit cohesion. But can anyone today imagine telling a person next to you that they should be judged based on the color of their skin or the circumstances of their birth, and not on the quality of their service? And as goes the military, so goes the nation. In the years following military desegregation, Jim Crow laws fell across the country, and today we have laws that prohibit racial discrimination and segregation. In 1978, 30 years after the successful elimination of racial segregation, the military took another step forward by formally integrating women into the regular enlisted and officer ranks, doing away with the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, and establishing a policy of equality regardless of gender. Despite the fact that women have served in or worked with nearly every military since the dawn of civilization, once more there was an outcry and unfounded dire predictions of doom and gloom. Today, our military continues to be the best in the world, and our integration only serves to strengthen us. At the beginning of my own service, in 1994, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was implemented. This policy acknowledged the existence of gay, lesbian, and bisexual service members, but required them to serve in silence, hiding who they were and who they loved. Those who were outed were discharged, and often under other than honorable or dishonorable characterizations. A stigma that would haunt them and prevent them from claiming the veteran benefits they had rightfully earned. It took more than 17 years for this shameful policy to be repealed, and in 2011, the world celebrated. Only 3 years after this historic event, we have seen the fall of the Defense of Marriage Act, and state after state has said yes to marriage equality. As goes the military, so goes the nation. The latest historic advance for our services is the lifting of the ban on women in combat arms. This monumental event, the last barrier between genders in the military, became official policy in January 2013 and will be fully implemented by January of 2016, just over a year and a half from now. When this change was announced, President Obama stated that valor knows no gender, and went on to declare that this decision would strengthen our military, enhance our readiness, and be another step towards fulfilling our nation's founding ideals of fairness and equality. Yet in contrast to these bold words and the spirit behind them, gender exclusions remain, and our work is not done. Despite a history of paving the way for equal rights in this nation, in one outstanding issue, our military is trailing the nation and our allies, and is failing to live up to its obligations to those who serve with honor and dignity. When I realized I was a transgender soldier, I spent days visualizing how I, as a company commander, would come out to my troops and tell them that I was transitioning from male to female. Imagine my shock and horror when I discovered that the military's policy banning transgender service based on 40-year-old medical misinformation was still in effect. While I enjoyed a short-lived time in service as a female officer, my trans siblings in uniform are rarely afforded that treat. The atmosphere of this issue is reminiscent of that which permeated the service in our Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but without that policy's protections from outside disclosure. Liberal commanders looked the other way, turning a blind eye to unjust regulations, so long as trans soldiers continue to hide who they are. Those who choose to exercise their voices or cross the line beyond expected gender expression are ushered out the door quietly and told, "I'm sorry, this is wrong. You were one of our best, and you deserve better." Our leaders should be the ones shamed for forcing our soldiers to choose between a false pretense of authenticity or an embrace of our Army values that tells them to stand up and proclaim, "This is who I am." We must eliminate this last discriminatory barrier to service and ensure that those in uniform are judged only on the quality of their service and the strength of their character. As past integration efforts have proven, equality and open service forges a stronger force, a stronger nation, and a stronger people. Our differences are far outweighed by our common bond of duty, loyalty, honor, and integrity. We are not great despite our diversity, but because of it. Today, we are poised at a tipping point in our nation. The entrenched old guard leadership of privileged upper-class statesmen is giving way to younger generations and bolder minds that see that diversity is not division, that discrimination is immoral, and that human rights and human dignity are sacred and essential to all of humanity. I want to leave you today with some lighter words from the great Dr. Maya Angelou, who left this world only a few days ago. If you're always trying to be normal, you will never know how amazing you can be. Thank you.